Good evening, everybody in Alberta, Canada, and beyond. It is Wednesday, March 1st, 2023, and I'm Kerry Lambert, and I welcome you to an online webinar, Evening of Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, also known as APP. Our purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and sovereignty, by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship with Canada. Of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without your help. If this is your first time watching, welcome, and I hope you find this information engaging and wanting to find out more. And if you're a regular APP webinar viewer, thank you for your support. We couldn't do this without you. APP is membership driven with a goal of 1 million plus members to help steer the political process. APP memberships are 1 year for $20, 2 years for $30, 3 years for $40, or make a donation at albertaprosperityproject.com. We also have APP merchandise at the newly launched albertaprosperitystore.com. So tonight's webinar is entitled, Let's Talk More About the Netherlands. What happens in Europe is coming to North America, with our guest, Chris Scott of the Whistle Stop Cafe in beautiful Mirror, Alberta. And this is a live webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout this presentation. Just put 3 question marks before your questions so that it will be flagged and we can quickly view the questions. So now I'm going to bring Chris on, who's obviously reading a really in-depth book. There he is. So if you don't know who Chris Scott is, he's a freedom fighter since standing up to the Alberta government and Alberta Health Services and questioning why restaurants and other services should be closed during the Christmas break of 2020. And eventually he forced the government's hand when he opened in late January 2021, and Alberta was finally open in February 8th of 2021, which coincidentally was actually a day after the Super Bowl, in which most restaurants and bars should have been open. And since then, he's been speaking about rights and freedoms ever since. So please welcome my compadre that I also do another webcast called The Chris and Kerry Show. This is Chris in The Chris and Kerry Show. How you doing, Chris?
Hello, everybody. It's Chris here from the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta.
I've heard that before. So I think, you know what? Before we even get into the topic of today, I think we should at least make some broad statement about what's happened with APP in the last couple of weeks. And all I really want to say is that if you have been an Alberta Prosperity Project supporter and following, you'll notice that there's been a couple of people or a few people that have resigned. And I'd just like to say on behalf of APP that, shakeups happen. People leave for various reasons. And I think, especially, I've actually been involved in many types of corporate takeovers or corporate buy and sell and societies that
Restructurings.
have shrunk and restructure. So don't panic. That's all I can say is don't panic. APP is still continuing. And I think if you know anything about politics, this to me is kind of, I didn't realize my heater was still on. You might hear that fan going on in the background. I'm in my basement right now. I think it's important to note that the way government is actually kind of set itself up, when you're part of a political party, you can only take in so much money donated by each individual person. And I believe it's capped at $4,300 a year, right? Mm-hmm. As an educational society that is promoting a certain idea, you could actually take in a lot more. I don't know if there is a cap to that, but there's certainly more than $4,300 a person. And I believe
there is no cap as far as I know.
So I think it's important to note that if we're going towards this idea of sovereignty or independence or whatever wording you want to have, it's important to have 2 vehicles doing this. Otherwise, you're relying on just the one vehicle, right? You're relying on just that political party to push that. And in today's economy, today's political landscape, I think it's important to have 2 of those things going on. So
the way I describe that, Kerry,
yeah,
is that in politics, you have 2 ways of doing things. Well, at least in a very broad way of looking at it. You can either do what I refer to as the Kenny cronies did, and you can try and get in front of the polls.
Yes.
You can poll and see what's the popular opinion, and you can get in front of that. That's not leadership. That's called, I don't know if I coined the term, but I call it a poll hound.
Yeah.
Okay. The other option is you can be a leader and have a very brave idea and say, this is where I want to go. And good leaders will say, this is where I want to go. And they'll encourage others to come with them if their leadership is good and if the message is good. So when you consider political parties, if a political party these days wants to do the right thing, they have to change the hearts and the minds of the people who are going to vote for them.
Yes.
It's not about changing, necessarily what they believe in, but we're changing the way society thinks about themselves and politics.
Yeah.
In order to do that, I don't think a political party can do that. I think the only way this can happen is if an organization like an educational society does the legwork and prepares people to have their hearts and minds changed. Yeah. And then when the political vehicle arrives and you have to decide which politician to support, it becomes your duty to choose or vote your conscience. And if the political parties have done a good job, people will follow them.
Yeah.
So that's the way I describe this is APP is working to prepare people's hearts and minds so that the politicians who want to do the right thing and take us to the right place can do it.
Yeah. And likewise, I know people are asking whether or not there's other versions of APP, Alberta Prosperity Project, like in Saskatchewan Prosperity Project, BC Prosperity Project, Manitoba. As far as we know, there were certain provinces that started, like Saskatchewan. I'm not sure what state it's in, and I know Northern BC was looking. And I did hear rumors about Manitoba because even there were a few people that were talking about that too. And I
got to interrupt you for a second because I'm just seeing some comments that I'm trying to be patient because I know people have a lot of questions, but it's very frustrating. I'm seeing people ask questions in the form of stating facts and asking questions about the facts they've stated when the facts aren't even real. Okay. So if you want to know more about what's going on with APP and specifically you want to hear from Dr. Modry, Carrie and I will be doing a show shortly after this one. This is going to be a fairly short one because we want to be starting with our Chris and Carrie show at 8 p.m. ish, as close as we can. And we're going to do our best to dig down to the bottom of this and let you know. I will say, for the purpose of this webinar, we're talking about something altogether different. Yeah. And it's, in my opinion, it's actually more important than who is with APP in the operations team or why people left or whatever. These are what Carrie and I are going to talk about tonight is the problem that we're facing that we need to be united in fighting against. All right. Now with the Alberta Prosperity Project, I didn't join the Alberta Prosperity Project and choose to speak on their behalf and at their meetings and things like that and advocate for them because I wanted to follow Dr. Modry. I mean, I'm friends with Dennis, and I think he's an awesome guy, and I would definitely support him. However, I joined APP because I believe that I want Alberta to be prosperous. And I know that Alberta can be prosperous and free through independence. Okay? That's what APP is about. It's not about one person. It's not about four people. It's about the goal of allowing Alberta to prosper either by negotiating a better deal with the federal government or by standing up and saying enough is enough, we're out. That's what we have to remember. So please keep that in mind when Carrie and I start digging into the topic of part 2 of the Netherlands. What's happening in Europe is coming to North America.
Yes, and we might as well just jump right into that because now we're only going to have about half an hour, 35 minutes to get it. So actually, what I was hoping is that we would have been able to have Jasper on, who is Chris's compadre out in the Netherlands, and he's unable to make it. So what I did was I put up a video, which I have to apologize. I put the video up on the Chris and Carrie show and assumed it worked. And because it had a lot of views and no comments, but unfortunately the audio is all garbled from it. So I didn't know that until just recently. So I'm going to have to redo that. But in the meantime, I'm going to post I'm just going to change this. I'm actually doing multiple duties here. And I'm going to see if I can bring in a post. There we go. That's not what I want. So this was a post that was done on February 5th from Jasper. And since then, he's actually talked about a few other things in regards to what's happening over there. I'm just going to start with this, and then Chris and I can talk about this too.
Hey, it's Jasper.
It is.
I'm walking slowly
I'm hoping you can hear it.
in Amsterdam.
Yep.
And let's give you a big view of Amsterdam.
Yeah, I remember. I was there. I remember that.
You remember that?
Central bank digital currency, CBDCs. Our government and all of the governments are trying to introduce that, because basically the financial system is broke. I hope you can hear me, because it's quite windy out here right now. It's about 6 degrees. But central bank digital currency, they want to have stop cash money. In Europe, there are a lot of apps, bank apps already, but they want the governments want to control it instead of the bank and the bank system. So government-based money, so they can control you, whatever you're doing. Because if you wanna, if how you say it, when the government is controlling your money, they're controlling your life, basically. So, and there is this demonstration going on, organized by Samen voor Nederland, which translated as Together for the Netherlands. And this is the first demonstration this year, what they're organizing. Last of November, I believe. It's been butchered down by the authorities, because they had a guest coming over from England, and they didn't want to have him here. Maybe you heard of it.
I think that was David Icke. Like the guest that they wouldn't allow in.
Together for the Netherlands. You invited Catherine. And Catherine is a financial woman. She worked on the New York Stock Exchange, and the New York Stock Exchange, she learned a lot about money and how it's been working out. And it's going to be louder right now, probably. And later on, she worked for the first Bush administration for housing and property development. So,
anyways, I can stop that there. That's kind of it. And then they actually go into the demonstration, and there's speeches by a number of people. And that person that he was talking about was, I forget her last name. It's Catherine Nesbitt Pitts or something to that effect. I actually lost my notes somewhere in all my.
It's on the Whistle Stop Cafe Facebook page. But it's probably like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Anyways, it's amazing that is happening over there. We've already had somebody say that they're in Cuba and everything has to be done with credit card, no cash. A few weeks ago, I went to a bar. What are the odds of that ever happening? And they actually said to me, Catherine Fitz, they actually told me that they were not taking cash, and that everything had to be done in credit card. And basically I had a bit of an altercation, I guess, with the server, only because I said, well, like, what am I supposed to do? And eventually I succumbed to that, and I actually paid by debit. But it was rather ridiculous to be put into that position. I will never go to that bar again. And this seems to be more and more. We've all heard about the rumors of, not rumors anymore, Starbucks going all cashless as well. which again, to me, is a bit of a, it kind of ticks me off, even in terms of if you're working there. Everything's got to go into a tip pool, and typically, like if you're working in a restaurant, most people don't even know how tips work. So I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, just because they don't do tipping in Europe, do they? Chris, do you know?
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
they don't do tipping in Australia because supposedly they pay their people.
I'll be right back, Terry.
Well.
The dog's scratching. Hold on,
Okay.
I'll be right back.
So the idea behind tips, anyways, is that if you get good service, you typically tip, and then they ask for a certain percentage. And people say, yeah, I'm a good tipper, I give 10%, or I'm a good tipper and I give 15%. That's great, but it depends on where you're going. If you're going to a chain restaurant, say you're going to, I hate actually using names because it's almost like I'm plugging them but not plugging them. But if you're going to say like an Earl's or Original Joe's or something like that, if you do that, basically they take off so much for working the shift. Typically they take off so much for the staff that maybe works in the kitchen, or maybe you've got a serving assistant and that money goes towards that. And likewise, if you're in a small bar, maybe that money is actually just put into a pool and then is divvied up, or you're actually in charge of your own tip as a server, and then you dish out what you think is good. But typically, the server itself keeps 10%. So if all you're doing is giving 10%, what you're basically doing is you're only giving the money to the server, and you're basically not giving it out to the serving staff, or you're forcing the kitchen staff. What you're forcing the server is to make that choice as to whether or not they need to be making that and divvying it up to be a nice person, or whether or not they should actually be taking it and not being a nice person, if you want to call it that. But to me, I've always run into that situation where it can be awkward if you give less than that. My own personal take is give the 18 or 20% if you've had bad service, and then have a conversation with the manager. In this case, I always talk to Chris and tell him that his burgers are absolutely amazing, and I will always tip 30%.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so that was my little rant while Chris was away. Do you have any comments on, like, did you see anything in terms of central bank digital currency?
Okay, so yes.
Okay.
I actually spoke with the leader of one of the political parties there, and actually, I guess it's not really called a political party. It's called it's like a group, because they don't have enough people in the government to be called a party yet, so they're called something else, association or something. But anyway, Vibram van Haka was his name, and we spoke a little bit about this. And yes, absolutely, Europe and the EU, really, at the behest of, I would say, the WEF and the United Nations, are rolling out a digital currency. And Jasper referred to it as a CB. It's a central bank digital currency.
Yeah.
Now, this might sound great. In my business, I've even thought, like, hey, how convenient would it be if just everything was electronic and I didn't have to count my cash? I know, but I couldn't lose cash. Nobody could rip me off. That's great, right? And it is, to a point, as long as you have a choice. It's like eating crickets. There's nothing wrong with eating crickets. There's nothing wrong with eating cockroaches, except for it's disgusting. But we have to be able to make the choice, because we don't want to be forced to do these things. And being forced to use a digital currency over a fiat currency that you can hold in your hand can become very problematic, specifically if you have an issue with the government and say you're standing up against the government. Even in Canada, we have fiat currency, and the government used our bank accounts and used their control of our own wealth as a tool against us to force us into submission.
Yeah.
They froze people's bank accounts who donated to truckers who were protesting bad government policy. Mm-hmm. So that's where this gets really bad. In addition to that, when you move everything from cash, which we basically control as long as it's on us, like in our wallet, there's some more problems. So do you enjoy going to a garage sale and buying something from your neighbor and just getting a good deal on it? Well, you can kiss that goodbye, because now you're going to be probably, I'm not saying for sure, but this is generally the way things go, You'll probably be paying a tax on it. You'll probably pay income tax when you sell items, and maybe you make some money on something you buy and sell or whatever. It allows the government leaps and bounds more control over you and your money. We've already seen governments reaching into our pockets to the tune of something like 65 or 70% by the time the dust settles over the last few years. And the digital currency is going to allow that to go even further. And that's not even the worst thing. The worst thing is they could literally flick a switch and you no longer have any currency. That's the problem, the big problem that I have.
Yeah.
So this is happening in Europe. Everywhere you go, if you want to use the transit system, it's actually quite wonderful because it's all digital. You simply swipe your debit card or your Visa or whatever on the kiosk at the subway or the bus or whatever, and it marks when you went in, and then you tag it when you go out, and marks when you went out. It charges you for using that much of the route. It's super convenient. Most places, it's for your own convenience. Most places you can use your debit card for absolutely everything. You don't have to take cash out of your wallet at all. And I would say that people are mostly comfortable with this, and they are poised and prepped for a full-blown digital currency. And they do have this, they're starting to build the infrastructure. I talked to I can't remember his name. It was an IT guy, and he actually helps. He's a consultant who helps companies transform into a digital market.
Mm-hmm.
And he says this is going to happen, and the government is trying to do it, and they're going to bungle it up like they always do. Every time the government gets involved in something that the private sector should be doing, it's bungled and it costs way more money. He said it's going to be an absolute disaster, and he's got a lot of evidence to back that up. After we're done, Carrie, maybe we can go back and we'll just add a comment in as to what the fellow's name was, and maybe try and link it in or something, because I'm sorry, but I can't remember. So these things are happening in Europe, and that's not what brought me over there. What brought me over there was the farmers, because if you remember being in Ottawa, of course you do. Do you remember seeing the videos of the Dutch farmers protesting as well? And they had Canadian flags, right?
Yep, they did. Absolutely.
They were standing with us. They were standing up for us. They were right side by side with us, pushing back against what is, in essence, a globalist agenda.
There were truckers in South Africa that even had Canadian flags on theirs.
All over the world. So we see these Dutch farmers protesting, and then some time goes by, and I'm looking on the news. Actually, it wasn't the news; it was Facebook, which could be considered the news. But I saw videos of farmers in their farm equipment protesting, and the government just had Zoom booms in there, and they're picking them up and flipping them off the road. Thinking, what in the heck is going on here? In the words of Donald Lee, what the hell is going on? So I thought, they stood up for us. I want to go there and see what's Ken Van Ireland, that's the fella. Yeah. I want to go there and I want to find out what's going on. I want to talk to some people and see what's happening, because I know, I've seen it before, what happens in Europe comes to Canada. And it usually is pretty quick. Do you remember, Carrie, when Europe started taxing carbon, and we were like, what are you idiots doing? Why are you taxing plant food? We saw that. We saw it happening. And then a year or two later, it comes here. Europe goes crazy putting in solar stuff and windmills. Next thing you know, we've got this hideous windmill fiasco in southern Alberta and creeping all over Alberta. Europe starts using taxpayer money to subsidize green initiatives that could never stand on their own two feet, because they're not sustainable, they're not economical, and they're not feasible. And we say, how could you do this? Why would you do this, Europe? You're shooting yourselves in the foot. Next thing you know, it comes to Canada. Now, Europe is trying to push, the European Union is trying to push digital currency. They are putting climate policy. It's redonkulous what they're doing with their climate policy. They're saying, and we're saying here, we must be net zero carbon dioxide at all costs. At all costs.
Now,
and in
now
Europe,
you say we're saying that, but who's actually saying that?
When I say we, I mean I say we as a collective group of people in this country who voted for a government who is taking us down a path of destruction in the name of climate fanaticism. That's what I mean by we. You know, unfortunately, democracy and unity means that you can succeed together, but you also fail together. So if Canada fails, we all fail. It's not just those who are trying to take us down that path. That's what I mean when I say we.
Yeah.
We are going down this path as Canadians and as Albertans.
Yeah. And again, thinking in terms of we're voting in these representatives, and but we're voting. I'll just make a bold statement here that I think the majority of the people that vote are uneducated voters. And the reason I say that is because they are the ones that go to the polls who may have just picked up a pamphlet and it's either blue or red or orange or whatever, and they're based their vote on whatever color they happen to like at the time.
Believe it or not, there's people in this country who will vote for somebody who will put the future of the country at risk because they like someone's hair.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing about APP that I like, is that we have to keep educating. No, I don't like hair. I like my hair. Hey, you're not showing off your troll doll hair.
No, my hair is, it was a disaster. So the only thing I could do with it was put on a hat. And I want people to know that I'm wearing an APP hat because I 100% fully support the Alberta Prosperity Project and what their goal is and what they're trying to do for Alberta, regardless of who is on the leadership team.
So we got probably about 20 more minutes here. So I've got a couple of other topics. Do you want to talk any more about farming and
Absolutely,
what you saw over there?
Yeah. So I'll do my best to quickly rant away at what's happening in Europe. So in the name of climate fanaticism, this ideological blunder of a path they're going down towards net zero at all costs, they are doing things like they're telling grain farmers or like cereal grain farmers that they have to cut their nitrogen fertilizer use by 30%. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's here in Canada. This is coming to Canada.
And they're really just arbitrarily picked a number.
It's an arbitrary number.
From what I've read,
number has been used in other places. This is all over the globe. And you would think if this was a scientific thing that they would be taking regional differences into consideration, but they're not. Sri Lanka was exposed to this a few years ago. They told the Sri Lankan farmers they had to cut their nitrogen fertilizer use by 30%, and it devastated the economy. Their GDP dropped by 14%. 14%. Almost overnight in terms of economics.
Yeah. I wanted to go ahead.
It was so bad. No, this gets me really fired up. Get this, Carrie. It was so bad that the people actually revolted and they overthrew the government. It wasn't a pretty sight. I don't know all the details, but it was nasty. Yeah. The government toppled and they had to say, okay, well, we're not going to do this anymore. I think they even drugged the president or prime minister or something out of their home or something like this, something crazy. Well, we'll have to look it up later. But anyway, this policy was in Sri Lanka. It devastated them. As we know, it will devastate any agricultural-based region on the planet. If you reduce the amount of fertilizer farmers can use, you're going to reduce their crop output. You're going to impact their bottom line, and many of them will not be able to continue farming. When I was in Holland, I talked to farmers who were having these policies pushed on them. And they told me, with these policies, I won't be a farmer anymore in 3 years. They can't afford it.
Yeah.
And it's not just grain. It's not just nitrogen fertilizer. The dairy farmers a few years ago in Holland, the government told them, you have to change the floors of your barns so that you can more effectively deal with the animals' waste. Farmers said, okay. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars upgrading their facilities. It was tough for them. It was a crunch, but they did it. And they're back to business. And now the government's saying, okay, well, now you got to upgrade your floors again. And you have to make it so that your floors have kind of almost like a check valve. So when the cow poops, it'll open up and the poop and the pee go down through into the floor, and then it closes back up so that no ammonia gas can be
quite mechanical and quite expensive.
Very expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So then the farmers have to have this all in a contained system and has to be stored in tanks. And get this, they're not allowed, they're forbidden under these new policies to use their own animal waste as fertilizer for their crops on their farm. They can only sell it or give it away or dispose of it on other farms. It makes zero sense. Yeah. Fishermen, same thing. You see in the sea there, just kind of the North Sea, The people in the Netherlands, fishing it's thousands of years old there. I mean, that's what they do. And
Fish have been around a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're good fishermen. Now the numbers that I got when I was there was there were 90 commercial fishing vessels. I mean, this is a pretty small country. It's smaller than Alberta, right? There were 90 commercial fishing vessels. And the government went to these fishermen and said, okay, well, you're going to have to change your fishing boats, and you're going to have to follow these policies because climate change. And part of it was the fishing boats were said to be disturbing the seafloor bottom. So we can't do that because we can't disturb nature. So the fishermen who already upgraded their engines and things like that to meet the new APA standards, now they have to spend more money on preventing seafloor erosion and this and that. Okay, well, we can't do it. What are we going to do? And the government steps in and says, don't worry, we got your back. We'll buy your fishing boat from you. We'll buy your license and you can just retire. But sign on the dotted line that you can never be a fisherman again in Holland. Mm-hmm. And they took their boats and scrapped them. Well, how many fishermen would do this? Like probably maybe only 10 or 20 of the boats would not be able to afford the upgrades, right?
Yep.
76 at the time I was there. Out of service, scrapyard, done, never to return to fishing again. And this is happening in every agricultural industry in Holland, in the Netherlands. And I'm sure this is happening across Europe. But at the same time, a fellow by the name of Mr. are buying up farmland in Holland to be used in the future. And then there's also some talk about a conflict a little ways to the east of the Netherlands, where there's some farmland that they want to use to produce food for Europe. I think it's called Ukraine or something. I'm not sure what's going on there.
I can't scroll that far.
So this is what's happening. These climate policies, these ridiculous climate policies that make no sense, that are not scientific, that don't take into account regional differences, being blanketly applied all across the globe, because we have to be net zero at all costs, are going to not just slightly lower our overall emissions, they're going to lower human impact, which is the core of this agenda. Mm-hmm. So now continuing on with the farmers, if the farmers are unable to keep farming, the government has said, we'll buy your land, we'll buy you out. And this has already happened to some farms. Some farmers have said, well, we can't farm under these conditions. So yeah, buy our land and we're out of here. They move off their farm into the city where the government wants them. And the governments are tearing the farms out and returning the farmland to nature in the name of biodiversity. Yeah. Well, guess what? They're being told by the European Union that they need to return 30% of their developed land back to nature in the name of biodiversity to stop climate change. Guess what they're doing in Canada? They're telling us we need to return 30% of our developed stuff, including agriculture, back to nature in the name of biodiversity to prevent climate change.
Yeah,
sounds crazy, right? It's not crazy when you consider the other things they're doing. Now they're talking about, this is a real thing, spending $25 billion per year to block the sun's rays to lower. Actually, it's more than 25 billion. Pardon me. It was 25 billion per degree to lower the Earth's
temperature. I'll see if I can call that up.
I'm not even kidding. You cannot make this stuff up. No. This is science fiction in real life. And the problem is there is no happy ending if we don't stop it. The ending of this movie is a reduction of human impact. And the only way to reduce human impact is to reduce humans. And it's happening in Europe. If it's happening in Europe, it's coming to Canada. So when I see people, bickering about equalization or our taxes or, I don't like this politician because this or whatever, it makes my head want to explode, because the big picture here is so much bigger than these little irrelevant differences that we have. This is like some of us believe in the sanctity of human life. I was reading this book called Fossil Future by a fellow named Alex Epstein. Mm-hmm. And he's about my age. I think he might be a year younger than me, right? No, I think he's younger than me. But he wrote this book and a couple others. You can check this out at alexepstein.com. Another good website to go to is energytalkingpoints.com, and he discusses a lot of things in this book. So what Alex is saying, he's a philosopher from Laguna Beach, California, of all places. And Alex, in his book, lays out a very logical and well thought out argument as to why, if we're concerned with what we should be, which is human flourishing, the human species flourishing and surviving, we must use more fossil fuels, and we must be expelling more carbon dioxide if we want to flourish. It's all laid out in this book. And it's really amazing when you read it and you read it in the perspective of somebody who values human life, right? Those who don't value human life, they don't want us to farm. They don't want us to have cows and steaks. They want us to eat crickets. They don't want us to fish. They don't want us to travel more than 15 minutes from our home. They don't want us to go on vacations while they're jetting around in their private jets. Yes, they don't want to allow us to catch rainwater. In Prince Edward Island, they charge somebody GST on the electricity they generated from the sun's rays using solar panels. They don't want us to have anything because our very existence is seen as detrimental to this planet. That's what we're fighting against.
And they don't want farms to have more than 4 chickens or ranches or
these new municipal bylaws that are all popping up at the same time with the same wording. Do you think these are things that those municipalities want? Do you think these are things that the constituents in Lacombe County want, or in Edmonton? They don't want these things. These policies are coming down from external organizations, and these politicians are signing on the dotted line because they think it's going to benefit them.
Yeah,
they think these are the things they have to do to get elected, and that right there is all the more reason to join an organization like the Alberta Prosperity Project and be counted as one of those people that wants to stand up against this, regardless of what political stripe you are. I mean, there's NDP supporters who are members of the APP.
Absolutely.
There's UCP members. There's Independence Party members. I don't think there's any Communist Party of Alberta members, but I could be wrong.
We don't know.
It doesn't matter your political stripe. What matters is we need to be pushing back against these outside influences that are putting these blanket policies on us that we didn't vote for.
No. I wanted to show, there it is, block the sun, save the planet. The idea is that sun's rays to limit global warming, and then they talk about, it's like $1 billion per 1 centimeter or 1 degree. What is that? Like, who came up with that? And why is that even a conversation? What could possibly go wrong with blocking out the sun?
Carrie, what happens if we don't have enough sunlight?
We lose our plant life. And then up the food chain, we eventually lose us.
So if you look at some statistical kind of nerdy stuff, a lot of it you can find in this book. Get this book and read this book, and check out energytalkingpoints.com. There are studies that show quite plainly that as our carbon dioxide output goes up, the warming of the planet goes up, but it plateaus, it stops.
Yeah.
And these are the same models that are available to the scientists that are saying, you remember when Al Gore said the world was going to be on fire by 2016?
Yeah.
I don't recall the world being on fire by 2016. It never happened. Not one of these apocalyptic climate whatevers came to pass, because they're all fake. Every single one of them, including this one, including this idea that we have to block the sun's rays. Over the last 50 years, the planet has greened. Now it's greened slightly, albeit, but it has greened. It's getting greener. We're able to grow food where we were not able to grow food before. The sea level has not risen and taken out low-lying areas like the Maldives.
Yeah.
None of these things have come to pass, but we can grow more food. So it's almost as if, as human beings flourish and use more energy and expel more carbon dioxide, it's almost as if the planet has this response where it warms up a little bit so we can grow food in places we never grew food before. And if you start blocking out the sun's rays and dropping the temperature of the planet and reducing the arable land, farmable land, we're not going to be able to feed as much people. Now, compound that with a forced 30% reduction in fertilizer, way less farms because nobody will be able to afford to farm again. And call me crazy, call me conspiracy theorist, whatever you want. I see it happening in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. They've done this to other jurisdictions, and Sri Lanka is one of them. You can look that up. It is coming to Canada. Yeah. And if we don't stand up against it and stop it, it's not, this isn't a winning combination. This isn't a path to human flourishing. This is a path to destruction. And when it comes, when we no longer have food security anymore, which is a very real thing that could happen. Folks, for you out there watching right now, you should know that we are literally 4 days away from starving in this country. We have a just-in-time model of food delivery. And if that's interrupted or reduced in any way, we start seeing shortages. Gee, have we seen any shortages in the last 3 years?
Yeah.
What happens when people go hungry? What happens when they can no longer afford to buy food for themselves? Where do they go? They go to the government and they say, government, help us. We need food. We need food. And the government helps them and says, okay, well, as long as you follow our rules, we'll make sure that you always have food. And the people, just like this chicken behind me, will take all the shit and abuse in the world, have their very lives threatened for a few handfuls of grain that the government throws. Now, your politicians in this province, our politicians in this province, our federal politicians, they might not even have this on their radar because it sounds so out there. But I guarantee you that those folks sitting in Davos and having their meetings about how we need to cool the planet and how we need to have this global government and a one world government and a digital currency and forced vaccinations and things like that. Yeah. I guarantee you that they know if the world remains hungry, the world will be in submission.
That's right. Yeah.
And you know what? I'm gonna take some heck for this one. I admire the Dutch people, because the Dutch people, not only did they build a country out of a swamp, that's the Netherlands literally means low-lying lands. It was a swamp. They mastered their environment, mastered the climate there to the point where they are one of the world's leading food producers, and they do it incredibly well. And they brought that hard work and tenacity and technology to Canada and developed our farms here too. Not only are they like that, but when they got pushed to the point where they were starving and their politicians were taking away their sovereignty and their rights and their food, do you know what they did to their prime minister in the 1600s?
Didn't they ate him?
Yeah, they did. I actually stood in the place where they executed.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an urban legend, but ate parts of their prime minister. Now, of course, I'm not advocating for that, but I can't even imagine. When the rubber meets the road, the Dutch people will do burnouts.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I brought the map up and we didn't even get into it is you were talking about the 30% fertilizer ban, and they didn't even look at the region. Well, if you look at it, I mean, there's a lot of internal or inner coastal, if you want to call it that, which would have a completely different soil content than, say, all these little islands that are out here, right? And I mean, that doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And likewise, when we were talking with, again, I forget her name, but the girl that you interviewed that was also a farmer out there, she was explaining that the water that comes in off of a river that goes through Germany, and it picks up parts per million of fertilizer that they've used there. By the time it actually gets to Amsterdam, it's higher than what the concentration should be. So they're already fining the farmers, and they have nothing to do with that. And they're not even backing it up. Yeah. And then they say that it actually has to be at such and such a parts per million by the time it gets out to the ocean. Well, as far as I'm concerned, is by the time it gets out to the ocean, if you've ever swam in the ocean, you're pretty much filtered as soon as you go into there with all the salt. So I don't know. There's those sorts of things that to me seem to be almost so common sense, and yet the scientists are saying no, it's got to be this way for certain ways or reasons, and then they talk to the government officials, who then implement some sort of laws and basically make it so that it's even worse. I hate government. Have I said that before?
Yeah, I mean, we've all said that before, but I'll take that opportunity to remind people that it's not government that got us into this situation.
No.
I mean, the way our government is set up, it's not perfect, but it's good. Like, it should work, and it would work had we been involved, but we haven't been involved. It's not the government's as a structure's fault that politicians have become corrupt and are self-serving and have forgotten that they're serving us. It's our fault because we sit at home in the comforts that only a small percentage of the world enjoys. Canada is a very comfortable country to the point where we believe nothing can affect us and nothing can hurt us. And we allow other people to make decisions and chart our course for us. We give up our sovereign ability, our God-given right to choose our path forward as human beings. We give it up to other people, and then we complain when they do a bad job or we end up in a bad spot. And you talk to people from Europe, and they seem to understand much better than we do here in Canada with our comfy couches and our great food supply and our, mostly decent healthcare and our social systems, where we don't have to really worry about much. That we don't think about these things. But in Europe, I mean, in Amsterdam, I was at the house of Anne Frank, where German soldiers literally took this young girl out of her home and put her in a camp and killed her because she was the wrong race. These things happen. They've happened for thousands of years across history. If anybody believes that we're so enlightened now that these things won't happen again, I want to remind you that human beings haven't changed in 5,000 years. We are still the same greedy, lustful, envious, jealous beings that we were before. Nothing has changed. And if we allow those things to creep into our lives and to creep into the government and the authority that we've allowed to be over us, we're gonna go down the same path that these folks have gone before. And all you got to do is have a talk with, like, my friend Art. He'll tell you what it looks like when tyranny overcomes the sanctity of human life. My friend Yasna, rest her soul, she explained that, and she explained that to the RCMP, rest his soul as well, and the AHS folks as they were imposing tyranny on my business. They could tell you exactly what it's like when you don't exercise your rights and you lose them. We don't know what that's like in Canada. And Canada, you don't want to know. In Alberta, you don't want to go. You don't want to know.
So we got about 5 minutes before we have to leave. And I want to just touch on, we had someone that we consider to be a famous European come to visit us in Canada. And but I guess according to sources in the EU, she is not well liked, or she is not really well known. But we had Christine Anderson come here, who is the member of the German Parliament there, and the European Union, and she was the one that called out Prime Minister Trudeau. Let's see if I can quickly do this one, just because I like watching it over and over again.
Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a prime minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And I wanted to bring that one up because we also whatever happens out in Europe seems to be coming here, and they're talking about doing some sort of a ban on free speech and all that. And here we are with C11, which is the act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts, as well as the new C18, which is also an act respecting online communications platform that make news content available to persons in Canada. So with those two things on the horizon, you may not actually see Chris and I anymore on APP if that thing was to go, if that was to happen.
I'm concerned about that as well, but there is something in there that says something about not including social media platforms like ours. So I don't know enough about it to comment on it, but it doesn't sound good to me.
The thing is the platforms themselves actually have to police themselves. So that's what they're saying. So the act itself is like this broad scope, but then they're going to go back and say, YouTube, you got to do this. And YouTube is basically doing it anyways. But
well, it makes sense. It makes sense because the internet and social media is the biggest media piece of the pie by far, leaps and bounds, bigger than television, bigger than radio. I can't have a radio station and express my views on the radio station because they don't conform to what the government wants me to say. And that's a law. Like the CRTC, they say I cannot have a radio station and express my views. Now, they might say, oh, no, we believe in freedom of expression and blah, blah, blah. Mind you, there is no such thing as free speech in Canada, people. That is not a right we have. We do not have the freedom of speech. We have the freedom of thought, religion, and expression, which should allow us to express ourselves in a verbal way, but we don't have that.
I was going to say we can express ourselves through dance.
That's a great idea. I love it. I'm a great dancer. Only when nobody's looking.
That's right. So yeah, those, when you get into those sorts of things about free speech and again, not free speech, free expression. One of the things that comes back is APP's idea and philosophy of a sovereign, if you want to call it a country or somehow to work within Canada.
Well, the way I would say it, Kerry, is Alberta needs to stand up and say enough is enough. Our premier right now is doing that to some degree. I don't think it's enough, but she's doing something which is more than nothing. So Alberta either has to say or convince the federal government to leave us alone on these matters and stop interfering in our business, allow us our sovereign jurisdiction is guaranteed under the Constitution, or Alberta has to say, if you won't leave us alone and you won't treat us as a sovereign member state as we're supposed to be, then we're going to remove ourselves from this relationship. If the federal government is not going to hold up their end of the bargain, why are we going to stay in the relationship? It doesn't make any sense. I agree.
I'm just scrolling back through the questions. If you have put a question in with 3 question marks, again, when it comes down to the end here, that's about the only way that I can find something. So here's one. Have you heard about the gold backs the states are beginning to use as alternate currency? Utah is one state that is already accepting gold backs for payment. Is that more like a smart card kind of thing, or is that actually?
I think it's actually currency with gold woven into the currency. I have some somewhere.
Oh, seriously? Okay.
So this is a real thing. I think it's cool. It's neat. It's neato. It's the bee's knees. That's what I think of it. Is it a solution? No, it's not. None of these things, none of these parallel systems are any kind of a solution. They're merely a Band-Aid to buy time until a real solution's found. Because I'll tell you right now, it doesn't matter what we think we're going to use as currency going forward. If the federal government in Canada says, we are no longer using a fiat currency, our currency is now digital, here's how you do it. You cannot pay your power bill or your Ford payment or your Ford repair bill or your Ford tow bill or a new engine for your Ford from, Ford with alternate currency.
It sounds like you
can't go to your mortgage company and hand them a stack of gold backs or silver coins or gold coins or anything. So it's either we do it or we don't. And if we do it, which I think is going to happen, we have to. Go ahead.
They will phase this in. They will phase it in, saying you're going to get your income tax back through this government central bank digital currency, or you're going to get some other incentive. Maybe you'll get $100 for getting a jab. I don't know. But then that money ends up being used elsewhere. And then guess what? They're going to phase out all the existing cash until it's just, that's the only thing you can have.
Yeah. And you can't pay your mortgage with gold. You can't pay your mortgage with silver.
No.
And on that note, there's a lot of people say buy gold and buy silver, buy precious metals. If you want to protect your investments going through a transitional time, or say like an industrial revolution or a technological or a societal revolution, like what we're appearing to go through, sure, that's okay. But that's just to protect your wealth. For your day-to-day stuff, what does gold mean when a loaf of bread costs $1,000 in previous currency, like in Venezuela? Does gold mean anything? Does currency mean anything? The only currency in times like that are food, medicine, and weapons. That's it.
That is very true.
If you can choose to spend all of your time building a parallel system or something like that you think is going to get you through this, but it won't. Because at one point, it doesn't matter if you go live in the country or you go live in the woods, you go live on crown land. At one point, if we don't stop it, the government and their authority will come for you and they will put you in the system. That's the way it is. And anything short of standing up and saying enough is enough and exercising our God-given rights and our sovereignty over our own lives is merely a Band-Aid, which is why no matter what political path anyone wants to take, if we're not having this conversation about provincial sovereignty in our areas of sovereign jurisdiction and the potential of a referendum on independence to remove ourselves from the tyranny before it comes for us, if we're not doing those things, then we don't really have Alberta's future in mind, in my opinion.
One last thing, Bonnie said, nobody can say that they have worked harder than our team and we have made results happen. She's part of the Western Unity Project. You have to start at the soft underbelly and go from there. It turns out it's easier to crack an egg from the inside than from the outside, and the APP membership have been integral to that. It's not one or the other, it's multiple fronts, and that's very true. That's why I said, it needs the two sides. I'm going to put that down because otherwise it blocks my face.
So Bonnie's correct. There's a lot of different groups doing a lot of different things. The group Take Back Alberta has been extremely successful in getting people involved and engaged in politics and having them use their voices and remove some tyranny of the day from the government. However, there's a lot of work to do. And that's just one step. This is just one step towards an ultimate goal. And if you consider what has been accomplished with the current government, changes have been made, not enough changes. And even the premier has said, if this idea of standing up for Alberta's sovereignty doesn't work, and then what is the Alberta Prosperity Project and its members standing up and saying, listen, we need to get this referendum because we don't want to go down this path. If the federal government refuses to acknowledge Alberta's sovereignty, which we already have, and if you don't believe me, feel free to read the Constitution, it's right in there. Then we need to do something about it. We have a responsibility to do something about it. We have a duty to do something about it because there are millions of people, billions of people all across the world that look at Canada as a beacon of hope, a beacon of freedom. And more so Alberta these days. We have a duty to be the place that protects that at all costs, that believes in protecting the sanctity of human life and human flourishing at all costs, even if that means standing on our own and standing up against the tyranny of the day.
Yeah, and getting back to just the quick sovereignty thing, if people don't realize that right now, as of like right now, we could basically have our own provincial police force. We could implement our own pension plans and move stuff from the Canadian pension plan over to Alberta. We could handle our own immigration. We can handle our own employment insurance, and we can also do our own provisional tax collection. So those are things that we could be doing right now, but we've just kind of been lax about the whole issue. And then those are things that are going to be coming up in the next election. So I'd advise you to get out and talk to people about these important things. Make sure that you get involved. And I've said this since day one: is the only way you can actually make any change is definitely to get involved. And 3 years ago, there's no way I would have even thought I would have been anywhere near a type of APP sort of group society, and yet here I am. So I'm hoping that people will take that and hopefully do something with that information and become part of either APP or some other sort of political party and make the change that you want to have happen. So
I agree. And Carrie, I'd like to say thank you for getting involved, because I know that this isn't something you have to do. You could ride this out and you would be totally fine and probably happier for it, doing karaoke and just having fun. And you're choosing in Costa Rica. I know you're choosing to do this because of the people around you who you've watched suffer. So I want to say thank you.
That's right.
And I also want to say thank you to all you other folks like Bonnie and everyone else who has become active and tried to do something to make the world a better place. Thank you. Also, you're going to have to do the outro. I have to bail, Carrie, because I got to set up for our next
one. We'll do that,
one.
and I will jump over there. Thanks again, Chris, for your time and your effort, and I'm going to remove you. Okay. Have a good night. There we go. So again, thank you for everyone watching. I've got multiple tabs open here. And thanks for staying online and watching and listening and commenting and questioning, and it's good. We do these APP webinars every Wednesday with new speakers and new information as we go along. Next Wednesday, I actually don't know what's going to happen because we actually haven't planned that far ahead. Sorry. We usually like to book 1 or 2 weeks ahead. But likewise, if you want to get involved and you want to be a volunteer in order to do either the webinars or maybe get involved in doing some of the events, absolutely. Our greatest commodity is the volunteers who have organized all of this. And without volunteers, we would not be in as many communities as we have been. And the volunteers organize these events. And especially like if Chris and I are speaking, all we really do is show up and talk. So kudos to you guys for doing that. And if you want more information about Alberta Prosperity Project, please go to the website, albertaprosperityproject.com, and you can find out everything you want, and you can find out what's happening in terms of events and chapter events as well. And as for now, I'm going to sign off. I wish you a fabulous rest of your evening. We hope to see you at an event in person or online again very soon. I'm going to jump over to the Whistle Stop and go online. And so if you feel like following me, come on over. I'll probably have more than just this over there. Take care and God bless everybody. Good night. Now I have to actually do some work here.